So, hello everybody and welcome to the Kubernetes Korner show. This month we have Nitish Kumar, and really special guest because he's going to tell us about all the stuff he's done. On top of being the young superstar, which he is in the Kubernetes community, he's also, like me, a Kodekloud Ambassador, and that's how we met. And we actually did a study group together, which was really fun, the CK study group. And a lot of people showed up, and one of the things that I was surprised about, I thought study group would be okay, and then you see like 400 people online watching. I'm used to like 10, 15, and maybe 100 later. But so I was like, but Nitish was very brave. He talked the whole time. We got through it in the end. Anyway, so Nitish, first and foremost, I just want to ask about where you're from, what your background is in IT, why you started to work in IT, and what you've done recently, which would interest people.
Sure. I would not take much longer, but first of all, Jeff, thanks for inviting me, and thanks to the Veeam team for inviting me here. So my name is Nitish. I'm currently pursuing a major in computer science and engineering from one of the university in India. I have been involved in the CNCF communities, especially the Kubernetes community, right from my freshman year of the college. Other thing is that I have also been a part of various other student communities that involved, such as GitHub Campus Expert, or maybe something like Microsoft Learn Student Ambassador. Um, um, so when I started out, it was like I started with contributing to Kubernetes documentation, but then start contributing to some of the things that involve coding, and that's when I came across some of the CNCF projects, out of which I came across one Devops startup called as Octato. Then I started contributing to this project, and then I went into Linux Foundation mentorship program. I just applied it for the first time and then got into the Kubernetes project itself. So my application got selected, and then there I worked with the Kubernetes release engineering team to build a library that is now internally used by the Kubernetes team, and a CLI tool that is using that library. In the same month, it happened in September, I also got my KubeCon talk accepted. So it was a panel discussion. I thought of why not having a panel discussion on like how students can get started. So it was for the students, by the students. It got accepted. I attended the KubeCon, met a lot of good people there. And then I came across this company called as Nirmata. So they were actively looking for people to work for Kyverno policies. I applied for the role, eventually got through some of the interview rounds, got selected, and now I'm currently working as an intern with the Nirmata company. So that's a short overview of what I have done till now.
Well, that's incredible. Yeah. So one interesting thing that stands out to me right away is you're basically started with Kubernetes, is what you're saying. So a lot of us have been in IT for a long time, and we've kind of hovered around, physical machines and virtualization, and then we kind of wandered into Kubernetes, and it was quite the cold shower of having to relearn things. But what's happening, I assume today, is a lot of the younger folks are joining and going right into containerization and Kubernetes, and that's kind of what you said happened to you.
I mean, I'll very honestly. So when I started out, it was just a fancy term for me, and I'll tell you how I got introduced to it. So I was just seeing that there's this conference called as KubeCon, and I was like, I want to attend this and want to have some international visit. But then I got to know, okay, I need to contribute to Kubernetes project. So I started documentation. I did not know even the key of Kubernetes project, to be very honest. And I think it went till 6 months. I did not know, but I still raised PS, and it eventually got merged. I started learning on the way, and things started making some sense. But then I realized, okay, for every single thing I need to learn some prerequisite things before, like as you mentioned about cloud, or probably VMs, something like that. Yeah.
So did you code before you actually start Kubernetes, or did you go right into Kubernetes right away?
I went into Kubernetes right away. I was like, it's a fancy term, but I did not even understand what is it happening internally. I just got to know, okay, this is something called as nodes cluster, but I did not understand like how the things are internally working. And that's when I realized, okay, I literally need to learn a lot of prerequisites before that. And yeah, I literally need, and then I started on the way then.
I know the way you talk about this is incredible, because you just joined, you didn't know anything about it, and then you became a CNF mentor and your math. I mean, some of us have been working, pulling our brains apart to barely pass the exam. So this is pretty good that there are people who are faster at this. So tell me something, with the CNCF mentorship program, what is that exactly? Because I've seen that, and I'm assuming that what you're doing is, well, when I think of mentor, I normally think of, old people like myself, hey, I'll help you out. But here you are, student, and also helping other students, and that's really good too. So tell us about that program.
So what happens is, if you go through the CNCF, it's one of the sub-organization of the biggest organization, which is called as Linux Foundation, right? So Linux Foundation, you can consider it as organization of organizations, kind of. Okay, so Linux Foundation has some mentorship programs, which we like, something like Linux Foundation mentorship program. For example, Google has its own mentorship program for the students, that is Google Summer of Code. Similarly, Linux Foundation has its own program, which is called as Linux Foundation mentorship program. And what happens is that all the projects that are under the organization of Linux Foundation, maybe something like projects under the CNCF, because CNCF is also an organization under Linux Foundation. So they submit their application that we have something to work on, and we would like to pay something for this thing to be done, right? So something like, for example, so this program generally happens thrice a year, right? It happens in the fall, it happens in the spring, and it happens in summers as well. So what happens is, each project, projects internal submit an application, and then I think with some internal processes, there are some projects that gets out. Okay, this is a project, this is a project, this is a project, and people, especially the students, start applying for this projects to work upon. Now the thing here is that a lot of students apply to one certain project, but you as a student can apply to only maximum of 3 projects. Cool.
Okay.
So once you have applied for 3 projects, there are certain prerequisites for that. For example, maybe some of the project might say that you need to submit a cover letter as well as your approach to solve this problem statement within a span of 3 months. It's like an internship program. It's not an exactly internship, but it's an alternative for an internship, right? So you get to work. Sorry.
Oops.
So you get to work remotely for a span of 3 months, and you get with the project maintainers itself. That's how the things work. And for example, so when I applied it for the Kubernetes project. I was very fascinated because it was involved in Golang, and I was like, I want to learn this thing. And I eventually submitted a cover letter and a solution to how I'm going to approach this problem, and it got accepted. I was like, damn it, how did I get into this?
That's exciting.
Damn
Yeah.
it. Right. And then I asked my mentors, how many application did you get? And I think he said that we got around 120 applications, and we just need to select only one. And that was
Wow.
so it
What would
generally
you
happens.
recommend? What would you recommend someone who's applying for one of these mentorships? What to put in there? So it's for projects, certain projects. There's a term. After the term is completed, you get, I guess, the badge. I think I've seen them like the badge or something like that, and it looks good on the resume. But when you applied, what's important to do in that application, like to point out?
I think one of the main things that you need to do is more important than cover letter is your draft proposal that says how are you going to solve this problem within a span of 3 months, because next foundation mentorship is for 3 months and they eventually want it to be solved within 3 months, right? So you
Do they
should
give you the problems?
eventually,
Do they give you
yeah.
the
So
problems? Oh, okay.
right. So, for example, whenever any project applies for a Linux Foundation, you'll certainly go through the Linux Foundation mentorship website, and you'll see a lot of projects listed with description of what is a problem statement, right? So you eventually get only 15 days, because within these 15 days, you have to do research of yourself, try to come up with some solution, and then submit that application. And if it is good as compared to the rest of the people, chances are your maintainer might select you. But what I would recommend is, like, prepare a good draft proposal, right? Your approach, how you're going to solve this problem, and be in contact with your maintainers. This is very important, that how you're going to solve this problem. The last very important point is, each open source project tries to retain its contributors. So whenever the mentorship program is over, don't ghost the project. I mean, stick to the project even after the mentorship program is over, and just be curious. I mean, curiosity, what do we say? Yeah, curiosity can lead you anywhere you want to. So just be curious and prepare a solution, and submit it, and you're good to go.
And that also could be good for future employment too, because some of these projects then flourish and develop into actually full-grown companies, I imagine, right?
Right,
Right.
right. Exactly. Yeah.
So that's really interesting. So you've finished yours now, I assume. You've done your 3 months mentorship already. It's
Yep.
completed.
I did it in September 2023.
Right. Okay. And then, but your trip to KubeCon was something different, right? You had to apply and get accepted, right? And that's what you did. That's a separate entity. I'm just trying to show people, because people know that they're called for papers for different, kind of events. And KubeCon has its call for papers. Then there's the mentorship, but you actually had something accepted and went to Chicago. And got to remember, folks, Nitish is in India, so it's very far away. That's why this is a really interesting conversation. I think, what was it, 9 p.m. there? And it's like 10 a.m. in the morning here. So that was a big thing for someone to get accepted to go to Chicago KubeCon. I remember you had to go get a visa at the U.S. Embassy. It was a big thing. And then you went and you had a great time. What was the process like for that?
I'll be very honest. So this is quite interesting story. So I think it was around 26th of August when the CFPs for the KubeCon were to be announced, results to be announced. And I remember one of my CFP eventually got rejected. It was for a local event on 20th of August. 2021, and I literally was very sad about this thing, that why did my CFP, and I started self-doubting myself, but one night I was just sleeping, and I just eventually opened my eyes out of nowhere, and I got an email that your submission for KubeCon has been accepted. I was like, I did not accept it. I mean, I did not expect it to happen. So now the main thing was, as soon as I got this email, it was around 3 a.m. in the morning. I sent it to my family group, on WhatsApp, so he comes like, this is, and I told one of my very close friend about this. I think at that moment itself, I don't know, but yeah. And then later on, now when it comes to applying for the visa, if you're in India, getting a US visa is pretty tough because the dates are very far. But I would say it depends on a lot of things, depends on the luck. I gathered all the documents, I applied for an emergency request. I got my first slot for 2025, and then I applied for an emergency request, and eventually it got approved
Wow.
within one day. And
Wow.
then, right, so it got approved within one day. I got some slots shifted from 2025 to 2023, you know.
Wow. That's
I went through the interview. Second round was an interview. She was like, "Why do you wanna go?" I mean, the interview for the U.S. Embassy was like, "Where do you wanna go? Will you come
and
back?"
you
And
said
all of the
Kubernetes,
questions.
and the person went,
I,
"What?"
yeah, right. They were like, "Okay, so this is conference happening." She was like, "Will you come back?" I was like, "Yeah, I have my exams. Of course, I'll come back." After the event, she was like, "Okay." So she said at the end, "Congratulations, your US visa is approved."
Oh,
I was
that's
like,
good.
"Thank you."
Well,
I was
and
very
it's
happy.
important what you said just now, because for many of us who put in, call for papers, not just KubeCon, but other things, rejection is normally part of the process, and you have to get used to that. And
Right.
I remember the first times, I thought about something and I put in my little submission, and I thought, wow, this really sounds good. And then you see the email and it says, unfortunately, and the next one, unfortunately.
Uh,
Unfortunately, it's like, come on. And then when you finally get one where it says congratulations, you don't trust it. You think it's a scam, right? Someone wants some money or something, right?
right.
So how would you tell people, especially young people who are new and are just putting call for papers, not just a KubeCon? The KubeCon is pretty, wow, I haven't even tried KubeCon. But what would you say to them as
Right.
far as keeping yourself motivated and also not losing faith? As you said, not getting dejected and saying, I'm never doing this again, kind of thing.
I mean, I wanted to mention one more thing regarding the previous answer,
Yep.
that a lot of the panel members that we had, we eventually have to, let them go off the panel because their visa was not approved for the
Oh,
US. But
really?
now
Oh,
coming back, yeah.
wow.
And then we eventually at the end decided for more members who are going to replace them. But that was bad, but it's all good now. Oh, okay. So coming back to the question now, I think what I would suggest is, like, if when you're trying to apply for the CFE, I think it should be it should be like you should have a, first of all, clear problem statement, right? And your solution to it, your unique solution to this problem statement. First thing, so you can divide your CFPs in three parts. The first part always says like what is a problem statement. Second paragraph should say about the solution, and third paragraph kind of should spark an interest. like for an abstract or a description.
Mhm.
And even if your talk gets rejected, just try to submit this talk to some other conferences. Just know that you're not the only person whose talk has got rejected. There are a lot of people who get their talk rejected, and it's a part of the game or a part of the process,
Yeah.
because they get a lot of submissions. They can't literally accept
Yeah.
every single talk, but just have some unique thing. And Jeff, I believe that you get to know about unique things only when you try to get some experiences. For example, my talk was based on how students can contribute, right?
Mhm.
That was based on an experience I gained from the community. Similarly, I saw some of the talks that were being accepted was how did I manage to how did I manage 100 clusters at a time in the company. That's more of a related to experience. So try to gain as much experience as you can, and eventually don't get into rejection. I mean, you will go through rejection, but don't let it demotivate you.
Yeah.
Good things are waiting for you. Just keep happening. It's always the one thing that turns the tables around. So
Yeah. And actually what you said is actually another good point, is to create some talks and keep them, and don't just send them to one place. Like they make a little folder,
right.
and then, because these talks come up all the time. And also very important to try to at least put in something that you're familiar with. And I say that because I've seen people put in talks about things they've never done, but they've virtually done it in their head. And people can figure that out. So I actually had a funny story. I just got a Cube Huddle talk accepted for Cube Huddle Toronto. And the funny thing was, the title is How to Keep Yourself Motivated. And I used to be the most unmotivated person in the world. And I thought to myself, my high school teachers, if they saw that Jeff got accepted for a motivated talk, they think, what? So you never know what's going to happen. Tell me one thing too. I've seen this thing called Con Rejects, which is hilarious. It's
Oh,
a conference. Do you know about that and what those are?
yeah, right. So Rejects is a conference that happens prior to the KubeCon. It's basically for the CFPs that have eventually got rejected from KubeCon. So this is a 2 day conference that happens prior to KubeCon, right? At some different venue, but within the same location, right? For example, in Chicago. And people whose CFP have got rejected for KubeCon, they submit their talk for this one, for Rejects. That is the name, Rejects.
Yeah, I was
Rejects.
going to say,
And then
so even if you get rejected, you might get accepted by the rejects. Yeah.
right, because see, that is the reason they even created it. There have been a lot of very good talks that have got rejected because they have no option, right? So they get accepted in the rejects. And if you're planning to attend KubeCon, anyone who is planning to, make sure you attend rejects. It's a small conference. KubeCon is very large conference. It's going to get overwhelmed for you. But rejects is that one place where you're going to get the diamond people of the industry. You're going to meet these people. So
Is
make
it
sure you
cheaper
attend
than
rejects.
KubeCon? Because KubeCon's gotten quite expensive now. That's the other thing, which.
I So it used to have ticket price, right? I think from at Chicago they had, but I think from this time they're making it free. So
Oh, that's excellent.
you're good
That's
to
excellent.
go.
Okay, the other thing I was going to ask you about, since we're here, and who knows, some other people might be watching from Kodekloud. How do you get involved with Kodekloud, and how do you become a Kodekloud ambassador?
Okay. So I was aware of the Kodekloud platform, very honestly. I was aware of it just from the Twitter itself, and I went through some of the courses by Mumshan. They explained it really well. So one fine day, what happened was I was having the lunch in my college mess, and I was just randomly scrolling Twitter, and that's when I came across, okay, Code Cloud Ambassador applications are open. I was like, okay, are they opening an ambassador application? And I literally, while having my lunch, I just filled it, and all the work that I have done so far, and I did not have any hope that it would got accepted. But for a fact, I think not many people know. Uh, m- from a freshman of my college, I have also worked on running a YouTube channel, right?
Oh,
And
okay.
I think I've uploaded more than 100 videos. I've uploaded more than 100 videos,
Wow.
but now all of them have been now, what I can say, unlisted because I want to create new content. So I get some messages, just make them listed now, make them public, but I made some videos on Code Cloud as well for the people who were watching me, and I eventually submitted those links and submitted the application on what are the things I have done in the kids community, because those were eventually a thing that I've done so far, or maybe some of the programs like GitHub Campus Expert, right? So submitted it, And within, I think, 10 to 15 days, I get an email, acceptance email. I was like, nice, this is good. So again, the best part of I think the Code Cloud Ambassador program was meeting folks like you when we had the first call. I remember you were wearing a Linux Foundation cap
Yeah,
that time,
the
and I
Linux
asked you.
Foundation hat. So I like to collect
Yeah.
swag, I must admit. And when I was at KubeCon in 2021, they had the hats. They weren't free though, and they weren't expensive. But I always think, why buy swag? But I thought, no, I got to have this. So that first meeting, I thought, they're going to say, who is this guy? And I thought, well, I put on the hat, they'll think I'm someone important, because it said Linux
Oh,
Foundation. They thought, oh, well, he must be from Linux Foundation, which I wasn't. I just bought the hat. So yeah, I remember Moonshot. That's the reason I went to CodeCloud too. And as you said, they explain things so well. I mean, I wouldn't have passed any of those exams about CodeCloud. It's just fascinating. And I had him on the show last year, and he went through his experience, which was fascinating. So you joined CodeCloud as an ambassador, and then you did the CK study group with me, which was fun. And what did you? So I'll tell you right away. As I said before, I was surprised by the sheer numbers. Like I was expecting 10 or 13 people, la la la. We joined, and it's like 400, and it was like,
right.
I didn't know what to say. But what was that like? Because remember, we've got our daily lives, we've got stuff to do, and this is another question to you about being like an ambassador is no one's paying you for this, and this is one of the problems. You've got other things to do, so you really, I guess, especially when I was younger, I couldn't organize anything, right? So the fact that you're able to do this and organize is incredible. What would you give advice to young people about how to approach these things? To be careful not to take on too much so you don't disappoint, or like how did you manage to plan your work and your time so that you can have a social life, you can be an ambassador, you can be a mentor?
I think, yeah, the time management is the key. So there's something called as not that thing, but everyone needs to realize that no matter what things you do, you should always allot some time for your self learning as well, right? Whenever you're doing some voluntary stuff. Now coming back to the voluntary stuff, how do I manage time? It's something this way that every single day I have some specific hours allotted for self learning, and rest of the time I'll do for the development, and that involves probably some open source work or anything. So in the early morning I'll do some things that are eventually the most important, so get the most important things done, and for the rest of the time get those things done that you eventually like, maybe something like reading a book, or maybe something like doing some voluntary stuff for the community. So again, everyone has their own time management skills, but there's one more thing that I generally follow is like you should have some goals already defined. So what I generally do is I have a diary maintained in which I have the yearly goals written. Those yearly goals have been divided into monthly goals, right?
Mm,
Those monthly goals have been divided into weekly goals, and those weekly goals have been divided into daily goals. You know,
hmm.
so when you break down the problem statement into multiple problem statement, you eventually mind tries to get this thing that okay, I need to do this particular thing, and be very conscious about what you are writing on your diary or personal notes for managing your time, because whatever you read, your mind is going to observe that thing, right? Break down your goals into daily goals, and you're good to go. You'll manage your time, right?
That's really interesting because that's one of the things which I've heard time and time again is the ability to prioritize and to break things down into daily, weekly, and priority goals is essential for any success. So that's yeah, and incredible. I mean, it took me like 25 years to learn that. So it's incredible that someone. But you seem to have a lot
Yeah.
of luck too. You get accepted here, accepted CodeCloud. I think I'm going to buy a lottery ticket and have you co-sign on it so that when we win $1 million. Um, but okay, joking aside, let's turn to a little bit of technical now. So
Yeah.
right now, as you said, you've joined Nirmata, and they work with Kyverno. And so for people here who might not know much about policy engines and Kubernetes, I'd like you to kind of explain those. I know them a little bit. I mean, I know them enough that when I passed the CKS exam, I'd learned OPA, Open Policy
Oh,
Agent,
yeah.
and has this Rego language, which I kept mixing up in my head. Lego, Lego, Rego. And I learned it enough to pass the exam, but after that, I didn't touch it. So, can you explain to people what a policy agent is in Kubernetes, what it does, and then specifically what's great about Kyverno?
Cool. So the fact is, what let's talk about what is a policy engine. Before understanding policy engine, let's talk about what do you mean by policy at the first place. So imagine you are trying to go to a school, right? And whenever you're trying to enter the school, you will see that there are some guards that are present at the gate of the school, right? And they have certain rules defined that okay, if you're a teacher or if you're a parent, we'll let you go inside the school. Otherwise, you probably have to fill some form, XYZ things. You have to do something. You are the person who is trying to enter the school. You are a resource. Cool. School is like a Kubernetes cluster, right? I'm just trying to relate.
Yeah,
And
no, that's
guard
excellent.
is like a policy. Yeah, so guard is like a policy. So guard policy means set of rules. Set of rules defined for a resource to enter a cluster. Set of rules defined by a guard for a particular person to enter the school. That's in simple terms, in non-technical terms, what policy is. Now coming back to the technical terms, what policy means in context of Kubernetes is that these are some of the set of rules defined for your Kubernetes resources, that whether they would like to be made, that whether they would like to be present in the Kubernetes cluster or not, whether we should let them these resources created or entered in the cluster. For example, you should not. There can be a policy or there can be set of rules defined that say something like, uh, in your deployment file, the name of the image, in the name of the image, you should not use any image of with tag latest. This is
Hmm.
a rule that I have defined. Cool. This is for the security features I'm defining. So what Kyverno does is Kyverno is like a policy engine, right? It will eventually, it will eventually try to check whenever a resource tries to enter your cluster, maybe like a service deployment or whatever. It will try to check whether that resource matches your, policy or not. If it does, Kyverno internally is going to do some magic, which is something like validation mutation, depending upon the policy. Cool. And based on that, it's either going to give you failing checks. Say, Nitish, you said that in the policy that image tag should not be the latest, but now you're trying to trying to create a deployment that has an image with the tag latest. I'm not going to validate it. I'm not going to let you enter that, right? So other thing is mutation. Kyverno also has mutation. Mutation means something like if Kyverno is going to create a resource that matches that policy. Cool. And then there are some things more. But the thing with Kyverno is that these policies that Kyverno has, these are very Kubernetes native, right? So these are meant for the Kubernetes resources. And we thought of some way that maybe we want to create some policies for other resources as well, other configuration files such as probably Terraform files, Docker files,
Mm-hmm.
cloud configuration files like that. So we should have some sort of policies, that will check whenever any resource tries to enter maybe your AWS S3, AWS account, it should have certain rules defined. So we tried working on some other project as well along with Kyverno, which is a very interesting tool, I can say, which is the Kyverno JSON. So what you need to do is just have some configuration file, whether written in Terraform or whatever the thing, and you use the Kyverno JSON CLI tool, and we have written policies for you all. So you just pass that policy as a flag, and you pass your JSON payload. JSON payload means like your policy content in the JSON to the Kyverno JSON, and it is going to check and it is going to match whether your policy, whether your Terraform file resource is matching with the policy or not. But in general, this is what Kyverno does, and it works basically at the security level, which is that how important is it to have security features enabled for your cluster. Otherwise, things get pretty hard on the way.
And one thing I'll say too is like I really like your example of the guards in the school. You can tell you were a Kodekloud ambassador with a CK study because it's making things simpler. So the mutating, people might say, what is mutating? Destroying it. In fact, the good analogy there is you're going in and they say you can't wear leather jackets. So the guard will take off the leather jacket and let you go in. That's a mutating webhook, right? So that's the kind of thing.
Right.
One thing also that I remember was that Kyverno, I believe, uses YAML files. So you can make your declarations of YAML files as opposed to Opa, which is the open policy agent, which uses this Rego language. And for people like me who just are still on my Python course, I'm getting there like once a month, like to learn a brand new language just for a policy engine is like So that's another thing. It's actually Kubernetes declaration, right, that you can use.
Exactly. And for a fact is that when we're using Kyverno JSON, you again the policies are written in YAML format slash JSON as well.
Mm-hmm.
So depending on whatever language you're comfortable, you can have your policies written. Yeah.
So where else? So this is interesting. So it's not just Kubernetes. You can use this for Terraform. You can use this for other things. And what would you say is the most important role of the policy agent? Where have you seen it used the most? I mean, the latest example is interesting because I remember studying for exams, and that was one of the things they said is, you don't want to use latest, right? But where in production, now that you've been working, do you see it used most often? What is it trying to prevent? What is it trying to do?
Cool. So one of the very good examples that I can give you is something like this. Imagine you have deployed your workloads on AWS. Cool. And you have certain objects that are present in your AWS S3, out of which that you want that certain number of objects are publicly accessible, while certain number of projects are only accessible to the team members. Cool. So there's certain you will now, as a user, what are you going to do is you're going to write a Terraform file for it, and you're going to define certain number of things like this what I can say, this AWS S3 bucket should have certain objects that are publicly accessible or not. So we as an internal have written a policy that is going to check everything in your infrastructure. Any of AWS S3 file has that publicly accessible available or not. If it has, we're going to give you failing checks. We're going to tell you that, hey, you have a failing, you have an AWS S3 bucket that eventually gives publicly accessible to the buckets, sorry, to the objects inside the bucket. This is one of the use case. Other thing is that you can use these policies as a part of your CI/CD workflow. What I mean to say is that whenever you're building your workflow or whenever you're building a product, you might find that there are a lot of bugs that gets introduced after the product eventually has got released. And whenever you find that the product has some kind of bugs in the release phase, it becomes little bit difficult because then you have to go through again the CI/CD workflow and then fix it from the scratch. So there should be some of sort of way that these policies can somehow be uh, integrated within a CI/CD workflow such that it's going to check whenever you raise a PR. It's going to check. When, example, whenever you try to create a deployment or whenever you try to push a deployment file to your cluster, right? It's going to check that Nitish, you have created this deployment file that with the name images latest, something like that. So these policies can also be used within your CI/CD workflows. It can be used to have your infrastructure completely relied on the policies, and it works at the security level. So yeah, I mean these are some of the use cases. Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, and so basically, when you're saying this, it can also be used for testing your software in that part of the CIDC, right? You can use the engine. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, yeah, and so basically in Kubernetes, if you're creating basically a workflow and you apply it and you have this in your cluster, it's going to react right away. So basically what normally happens, let's take a simple example. If I do a kubectl run nginx image nginx, it's just going to run. If there's no policy engine, nothing's turned on. But let's say I'm saying something like, I assume that it can also stop you from running privileged containers, right? Okay.
Right. Yeah, that's
exactly. So that's another example too. And privileged containers, why don't you explain about that? For instance, why is that a problem? So it's a good example of why you'd want a policy agent there. Let's say you've got a very important cluster and you don't want any kind of container breakout. There was recently a big alerts because there was in run C, I believe there was a container breakout problem, but that was on it. Yeah. So basically this is important stuff. So explain that, why you'd want to do that. Like what is this root privilege kind of container problem?
So the fact is, when you have a root privilege, eventually think of it. Whenever you try to get a root privilege inside of the container, you eventually have the power to do a lot of things. Example for that is you have a power to disable certification validation, which you generally don't want. Example, let's imagine that you're trying to install certain things which are not probably validated, which are not probably what I can say. not validated, right? So
Hmm.
you generally have certain set of operation that you can perform with the help of a root user. And generally it is recommended not to provide you permissions as a root user, because you eventually get all the access as compared to a normal user. So you can do any sort of operations which might not be needed, or which might not be trustworthy for this point of time. So it's very important that, for example, any person who tries to get inside, any malicious user who tries to get inside a container, have some root privileges access to your container, they could do any sort of stuff. Probably they can disable the firewalls, something like that. So it's very important at the security level that you can do. One of the use cases that I wanted to mention here is that, imagine you're trying to get some packages installed, and you write a Docker file for it. Just a very simple example, like I'm considering a Docker file here. Now, you're trying to get some packages installed using the curl command, right? And if you went through the curl command, you generally have certain option. I think it is called as minus minus insecure, to
Hmm.
disable the certification validation.
Yep.
What it means to do with that, if you provide that flag, it is not going to check whether any package that you install is authentic even or not. It's just going to
Mhm.
install it. Chances are it might crash your system, or it might have bugs that could lead your system to be destroyed, or create vulnerabilities. So we have certain policies that are going to check at security level whether you have disabled certification validation when using curl command, or when using wget command while trying to install packages. So these are all work at the security level, which I think is required a lot of time. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that also the reason for that is someone could have an Nginx name
Right.
container or whatever, but it's not. It's really their own, right? And without the verification, yeah. So that's one of the ways that you can protect your cluster. Do you know the history of these policy engines, when they first appeared and which one was first? I know there's a third one too, which I was reading about. I think it's called JavaScript policy or JS policy. So there's Opa, there's Kyverno. Do you know when this all started? I mean, is it because everything in Kubernetes seems to be recent? It's like, well, this was introduced like a year ago or something.
I think for a fact is that I think it all got started in a 2014 itself, when Kubernetes were
Oh,
eventually
okay.
released. Yeah, but for a fact is that if I talk specifically about Kyverno, I think it was probably started in 2017. I might be wrong, but it started probably in 2017, and then eventually got into CNCF graduate, was declared as a CNCF graduated project, I think, in the year 2020.
Okay.
Considering its high demand, the statistics might be wrong, but I think it's
Yeah.
available probably on
Actually,
internet.
can you
Yeah.
explain that to people too? Because some people don't understand the process of how things are accepted in Kubernetes. So you have a project, and then it gets, I think there's like an alpha stage, whatever, and eventually it's accepted as a sandbox project. Can you explain that whole process? Let's say you create your own Kyverno, like your own Nitish policy
Uh,
engine. What would be the process of that going to become accepted?
so for a fact is that I think whenever you try to create a project, if you go through the CNCF website, they certainly have a certain application form that you as a maintainer have to fill for an project to get it hosted under the CNCF organization. And then they're going to see that if this project is worth accepting it under the CNCF organization, like how many use cases and things like that. So I think the first stage is what we refer to as, it's called as a sandbox project. Sandbox project is like projects that are generally not, what I can say, not recommended to be used in production, right? And these are the projects that are mostly being worked on, right? Of course, all projects are worked on, but these are not generally recommended. Once you have certain set of rules defined, uh, rules criteria met, your project eventually moves to the next ladder of your, what I can say, your project moves to the next ladder, which is called as the incubating project. Now, your
Uh,
project that was in the sandbox project area is now in the incubating project. So, incubating project is again, it's like, now it's a little higher at a little higher, sorry, at a little higher hierarchy.
mhm.
Cool. And you get support from the CNCF organization, maybe in terms of funding, maybe in terms of numbers and things like that. But once your project starts performing good, here is that, okay, so incubating projects can also be used in production, but I think these are generally also not much of recommended since they are currently being worked on. Once your project has even gone through the incubating projects, after you have tried multiple things and things like that, it moved to the highest stage, which is called as a graduated project. Now your project is under the highest stage of the CNCF, and CNCF is going to provide you like a lot of support. Some of the graduated projects are something like Kubernetes, or maybe some Argo CD, Container D, HCD project. Um, Something like Prometheus is also there.
Mhm.
Open Policy Agent, like as you mentioned, OPA is also there. So these are the CNCF graduated projects. So you're training. So you start generally from sandbox projects, and then you move to incubating projects, and then you move to the graduated project. So there's certain application form that needs to be filled. I think there's one more which is called as archived projects. As far as I
Oh,
remember, I
okay.
studied in the first,
That's
yeah, and
interesting.
I studied in the freshman year. It was around like some of the projects have are archived as well, so they are not generally used, but need to study what they are as well. So these are archived as well. I think this is pretty much the last stage, very last stage. So
So when
you
they're no
start with the
longer needed.
sandbox.
Yeah. So who makes the
Correct.
decision? Who makes the decisions? Like, is it a
I think
panel or a group or like who says, okay,
I'm
we're now
even
sandbox, a top secret
I'm
group
even
of
not
Kubernetes
sure.
experts?
I don't, I'm not sure, but I think so that there might be people involved in the K8s on the higher level, might be the people who might be judging, but I think these will be the most, these folks will be the one who are having pretty much good experience and are getting involved in the CNCF organization as compared to the K8s organization.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well,
Space
that's
Kubernetes
interesting.
is a project, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so that's interesting. So one thing I was going to ask you, have you played around with any of the other policy engines to compare them, like OPA or the JS policy engine? I think it's called JS policy.
I mean, I have tried to work with some other policy agents such as Chekhov, if you have heard of. I'm
Hmm.
not sure.
Yep.
Let me just. So Chekhov is also having certain number of policies, but they also do some good stuff. But what I feel like is that uh, that see it is always pretty much a good idea if you try to have your policies written in a language that people are easy to understand. People are
Yeah.
able to understand it in an easy way. So YAML and JSON are one of the languages, and I'll speak more specifically for the YAML. And also, you need to have some sort of way, which I feel like that must match with the things you're learning. Example, you're learning Kubernetes, right? You're learning DevOps, and Kubernetes is that one main perspective, right? So your mind eventually gets that habit of writing the YAML files
Mhm.
in a Kubernetes manifest part, a manifest structure type, API version, kind, metadata, annotations. So there should be some sort of way. It's not recommended, but I think that helps a lot, and that's what Kyverno has. Kyverno JSON has, which is a new which is a new CLI tool, as
Mhm.
compared to the other of the policy agents like Chekhov. They also have written a very good number of policies, but what I feel like is you need to learn the syntax. Whereas for the
Mhm.
Kyverno, you just have a structure already defined, and when you're learning Kubernetes, you're eventually learning the structure already. So it's always good.
Yeah, that's one of the things with OPA, which I found was, it's complicated enough to learn Kubernetes, and then you get to learn this
Mhm.
one language, Rego, which I don't even know. I mean, is it used anywhere else? I don't think it is. I mean, I don't bash OPA. It's a great policy engine, but for me, it was hard. I mean, to find time to learn another language would be hard enough. And then the JS policy is written in JavaScript, so you've got to be a Java script programmer. So that's okay. So that's interesting. So, question about the future now. You've been able to do a lot in a short time. Where do you see yourself in the future? I mean, this is I know it's hard to predict, but where do your interests lie? Do you think you'll be doing policy engines forever, or do you think you're going to move over to something else?
Um, I that even I have not even thought of what is going to happen next, but it's just like I have personal goals. Um, it's something like that. For tech, I want to get involved more into the software engineering, or what I can say, writing code more. Right, this is one of the things that I want to work. Um, Second thing is that I want to have some sort of way by which I could have some international visits to a country.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, bucket list already defined what are the countries needs to be visited. So,
Well, I think your trip to
um,
KubeCon helps a lot because I think if you've gone to KubeCon, that's going to look
yeah.
great, right, on your whole resume, on applications to go places and things.
I did not tell you about this thing as well. So when we were at KubeCon, there were two students who were invited for the Google Contribution Appreciation Dinner.
Hmm.
So that was dinner hosted by the Google, and only two students were invited for the Google Contributor Appreciation Dinner, and I'm glad I was one of them. But there's a very interesting story that was at for KubeCon that happened, and it was something like there's this person. If you are going for the KubeCon, make sure that you also go through Kubernetes documentary once, so that you get to know, okay, these are the people, these are the big people in the tech, right?
You know
That's
who to see and say hi to, right?
Right, because I did not go through this, and what happened was when I was at Google Contributor Acquisition Dinner, uh, I was talking to one of the maintainer of the Kubernetes. He was Josh Burkus, right? I was talking to him, and so there's this person called as Tim Hawkins, which is also one of the maintainer of Kubernetes, right? And I did not know what Tim has. I did not know about Tim Hawkins. To be very honest, I had not gone through. So but I have heard a lot of people, praising Tim Hawkins, and I knew for a fact that he's a great person. But what I did was I went to Josh, and Tim was standing right next to Josh, and I asked Josh, "Hey Josh, what has Tim done for the Kubernetes community?" And Josh literally called Tim and he said, "Hey Tim, what have you done for the Kubernetes community?" It's like you're asking that the most highest person is like, "What have you done for this thing?" He could be like, "Dude, I am the maintainer. I built this project." And you're
Well, I
asking
mean,
like,
in
"What
a way,
I've
it's
done?"
good though because I found, I've done things in the past where I've gone places and I haven't done my homework to find out who is who, and I've walked up to some great person and said, "Hey, what's the weather like?" Fine, and they like it because the first person, they don't know that you don't know them. They think that you just naturally are, "Oh yeah, I don't care who you are. I don't know who you are," right? So sometimes that's good because. Some of these people have people come up to them all the time. "Oh my goodness, it's Kesley Hightower!" But that's
Yeah.
hilarious. Yeah. Whereas if you don't know who they are, you can't make that mistake, right? So who else did you meet there? So that's a question I think people, when we're finishing up here, talk about. What were the best aspects of KubeCon? What did you like the most? What was the experience like? This is something I think a lot of people would love to hear.
Oh, so the experience was pretty amazing. If you are attending KubeCon, definitely highly recommended that you go, especially the North America one, because I think that's one of the most highest one. Um, so one of the best moments I had was like when you're trying to work with people virtually and you meet them in real, um, there's another kind of vibe that you'll experience through it. For example, the first thing that I got to know was the international exposure on how people eventually think outside India. What are their thoughts look like. First thing was that. Second thing was that whenever you are at these type of conferences, you'll find a lot of times that discussions are very oriented towards tech, and sometimes they're very oriented towards some fun stuff as well. So you're trying to get whole bunch of new experience, new people, like new food, new vibes around the city. Everything is pretty amazing. And eventually when you come back home and then you tell your friends about it, hey, I did this, I met this person, and if they know about that this person has met this person, they eventually get surprised and you also get surprised, like, how did I meet this person? Example for a fact was that at the last of our KubeCon, we had a dinner with some of the Indian folks like Sayam Pathak, if you know about.
Oh
That
yeah.
was like a very insightful discussion. you know we met a lot of people. I met a So I'll tell you something. I met a person who eventually worked as an intern at Apple, right? So he was given an assignment to, create an NPM library, a simple NPM library. Dude created a library for an Apple interview, right? Within 2 days. Jeff, you won't believe that library has 2 million downloads.
Whoa, in 2 days?
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
crazy.
it has to. He created two libraries, and the second library is used by 750K people.
Wow. That's incredible.
So you're gonna meet people like this one, and you'll be like, oh man, where am I? What I have done? You're going to question yourself, but that's very good thing when you, because that's where you get most challenged about. And that's best part of the Cube events like KubeCon or other events like GopherCon as well. You're going to meet the highest of the people that are in the tech industry and get some career advices, reaching out to companies, and they also get surprised. Oh, you're a student right now. How did you get here? Something like that. So that
And also important to also remember that at least when I went to KubeCon in 2021, they're very accepting, the people there. There was no snobbiness. So one of the things I was worried about, I've been in the VM world for years, and I'd only recently gotten into containerization. I'm not a developer, and I thought, they're going to look down or something like that. Don't worry about that. It's a very accepting community,
right.
And a lot of good times. And one of the final questions I'll ask you is, how do you choose which sessions to go to? That was the other problem too. There's so many interesting sessions. I guess you've got to think of your goals and plan it, because I want to go to 2 at once.
I so to be very honest, where I was at a level, most of the talks were going above the head from my, oh sorry, were going over the head, because I was not able to understand the technicalities there, and it happens. You don't try, you don't know everything, and there are certain prerequisites as we mentioned at the start. But if I talk about myself, I think I attended just 2 to 3 talks, 2 to 3 talks, because I eventually know at the end that these talks will be available on YouTube and I could
Yeah,
watch it anytime. But the
that's true.
people there is not
Not
available on
available on YouTube.
YouTube. So I need to talk about it.
That's
Yeah,
actually really important about conferences, because that's something we've kind of forgotten about. That the virtual experience will always be there. The human experience won't be there. So that's
right.
a really important thing too. So one other question, because you came from so far away, how do you deal with like jet lag or things like that? 'Cause one thing I've heard about people who come from far away to any conference anywhere is sometimes it's extremely difficult to enjoy it because they're falling asleep, right?
I had a jet lag when I was at KubeCon. I did not sleep for 1 to 2 nights, but I still was attending KubeCon. And whenever the evening happened, my eyes was like dull, and people were going to after parties. I was like, "How are you going? I need to go back to the place I'm staying at." But how
How
did I
long
deal?
was
It
the
was
trip?
like
How
it
many
was for
hours?
1 week.
No, but how long was
So
it to fly from is like 17 hours or something? Someone told me from depending on what
yeah,
airport.
it's around 17 to 18 hours. you
Wow.
know so you're going to enter in a new time zone and things gets pretty hard. But if anyone is like entering going for the KubeCon, of course these are some of the things, but just some general suggestions is like get yourself hydrated at any conference.
Oh, mhm. Good.
Two, because hydration is very needed, and second thing is you will have to walk a lot, so wear comfortable shoes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's it. So and the hydration is important too, because I know that sometimes you're in these conferences and you forget, and then that'll affect your alertness too. And then you don't want to be just drinking coffee, because coffee is not hydration, right? That's, people forget that. So,
Right, right.
well, Nitish, this has been a great talk, really interesting, and we got technical too. Is there anything you want to say as a final comment?
I mean, I personally enjoyed discussing. I personally enjoyed discussing everything that you had, and the questions that you prepared were like really amazing. It was not like, I very honestly, I think you also not have might have not prepared a bunch of questions. It was like more genuine, authentic conversation that we had with each other, and I did not have prepared any answers before this conversation. I did not know that this is going to be this conversation. But that being said, I personally love the communication. I personally loved each question that you had, the interest you showed. And again, thanks to the VM team for having me on the show. And I look forward for the following sessions. VM is doing amazing stuff
Oh,
for
it's
the
great
community.
having you. And I'll tell you, the thing is, I find that natural flow people like the most, because they can see scripted. Like if I've written a YAML file, okay, ask this question, ask this, and so that it can't be declarative. It has to be imperative.
Mhm.
All right, well, Nitish, it was great having you, and I'm sure we're going to be talking in the future, and maybe some projects or something. Maybe we'll see each other at KubeCon one day. That'd be fantastic.
Are you going to KubeCon Paris?
No, not this year. I've got so much on. That's the other problem too with these things, is you have to have time to study, time to do this, time to work, time to go to these conferences. So, but hopefully in the future.
Gotcha.
Anyways, we're
Definitely,
we're
definitely.
we're at 10:59. It's been a great call. This is being recorded, so it'll be on YouTube as well, folks. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next month. And thank you again, Nitish.
Thank you for having me. It was a good day.